Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to 10 Seconds to Air, a podcast about performance, mindset, and communication. Hey everyone, I'm Alita Guillen. We communicate about a lot of things with our romantic partner: money, kids, career, food, and politics. But how often do you really talk about sex? And if you do, are you doing it right? How and when should we talk to our kids about sex? Do men and women differ when it comes to communicating about sex? And what exactly is a sex script? My guest today has all the answers. Ian Kerner is a sex therapist and best-selling author. Ian is a licensed marriage and family therapist who, among other things, focuses on having healthy communication in your sex life. In 2004, he released the blockbuster best-selling book, She Comes First. Ian's work has been featured in the Washington Post, New York Times, NPR, The Atlantic, and New York Magazine. He is the go-to expert on sex therapy, and in his latest book, So Tell Me About the Last Time You Had Sex, he suggests couples use a sex script. What is a sex script, and how do you write one or even follow it? Joining me now is the self-proclaimed Sherlock Holmes of the bedroom, Ian Kerner. Hello, Ian.
I wish I hadn't self-proclaimed that, because hearing it out loud, makes me cringe a little bit. But okay, it was marketing at the time.
It makes you cringe, but I have to say it gives a lot of chuckles. So as long as you can go with that, and where did you come up with that? That was a marketing. It was a marketing thing.
Actually, I do feel like being a sex therapist is like being a detective, like more than any other topic in therapy. And I do all topics in therapy. I mean, I see a lot of different patients. Individuals and couples come in with sex problems and they know what they're experiencing: a lack of desire, some sort of performance anxiety or function issue. But most of the time, they don't know why they're experiencing it. They don't know how they got here or what's going on. And they really don't know what to do about it at all. So learning about them and the problem. And again, people don't always like to talk about sex, as you just said. So it can be a little bit like a detective and really having to, sometimes people are their own suspects, they're coming for help, but they're also acting like a suspect being interrogated,
Yeah. So I think Sherlock Holmes is fitting. We'll stick with that. So it's a little tongue in cheek.
Okay.
So I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I mean, in all honesty, I'm eager and I'm a little bit frightened. Well, we'll get into that.
Okay.
More on that later. So let's begin with the first question, as I do with every guest. What goes through your mind 10 seconds before you lecture on this topic, give a TED Talk, or meet with a new couple?
And that's great that you covered all three. And I want to say that I've been doing this now, for 20 years, whether it's talking to couples or talking to media around my book. And it's really changed over the years. In the beginning, I had to be absolutely prepared. I had to know a lot about the clients who were coming in as much as possible through email and questionnaires. Or if I was going on a TV show, I had to know the questions I was going to be asked. And I had to have my answers ready and, often on TV, have them memorized, Then I sort of started realizing, forget memorizing the answer, just start to improvise and actually start to change the question if you don't like the question being asked, and talk about the thing that is relevant to you. And then I went and did a TED Talk, and I totally had like a light bulb moment about this, like 10 seconds to air, because it's a terrifying 10 seconds to air when you're standing backstage and you're about to go on the TED stage. In my case, it was their first post-COVID 2021 conference. And basically, the folks at TED want you to learn your talk perfectly. And it's a highly curated talk, down to the word. And you've been editing it and going back and forth up until this talk. And you get there and you're supposed to have it memorized down to the word, but make it seem completely natural. And there's no teleprompters, there's no cue cards. There's just you on stage, right? Even talking about it, I'm starting to get a little nervous again. So I learned it perfectly. I approached it like Rocky. I actually listened to the Rocky soundtrack for days leading up every day. I was like, I'm going to rock this like Rocky. I would do my TED Talk in the bathroom, in the shower, when I was sitting talking to somebody else and having dinner, I'd still be doing my TED Talk. And I got out there on stage, and you know what? I did it perfectly, word for word. And you know what? It kind of sucked in a way. Or I feel like I only got to 60% of my potential. Now, here's the thing. The person who went on after me didn't have it memorized so well. And she sort of screwed up in the middle and said, oh, where am I? Huh? What's going on? What talk am I giving? Oh, shit. And everyone kind of applauded and laughed. And then she said, just give me a second. And she walked off stage and she came back on stage and everyone gave her a huge standing ovation. And not, I don't know, it was standing. And she gave an incredible talk. You know why? Because she had made a human connection that I had not made walking out on that stage. And I do it. I make a human connection every time I'm sitting down with an individual or a couple. That's all I want to do. But I forgot that, you know, and I went out there and I did it perfectly. I did what they told me, and I was a robot in a way, you know. So now 10 seconds to air, I don't even think about what I'm doing. I just think about the connection I want to make with people.
What a great learning experience. Unfortunate on such a big stage, right? But what a great way to set that up. That is an amazing experience to be able to say it was the human connection, which is so important. Sometimes we forget who we're talking to, which I would imagine happens, like you said. It's like you're still in private practice. You meet people all the time. They come in. If you don't have a human connection, I can't imagine they're going to open up, especially on a topic like sex.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, sometimes an individual or a couple is coming in and, you know, we grow up in a society that, you know, either our homes were sex avoidant or sex negative. They were rarely sex positive. We rarely heard sexual conversations modeled for us. We rarely, if ever, communicated to our partners in any sort of meaningful way. So often people end up on my couch and they literally just don't have the words, or they've never uttered the words before, and they're scared. They're trembling. Not everybody, but somebody. And my job, first and foremost, is like, hey, we're talking about human sexuality, which is just an important part of life. We talk about all parts of life in our lives and with our partners. We're going to do this, and I'll disclose about myself. In fact, and she comes first, I think what's made it universal is there's a lot of personal disclosure in there. And so people feel like they can relate to me. So it's 100% the human connection.
So it's interesting when you mention the book, She Comes First, and you also say that people have this resistance to, or maybe lack of vocabulary when it comes to talking about sex, you know, the communication element of it, which makes me wonder, when you came out with that book, and we're talking 20 years ago, it's not like people were talking about it more 20 years ago. Did it surprise you how well it did? You were taking on a topic that people were not talking about it the way you were talking about it.
I was taking on a topic that was very specific and very taboo. It was in the wake of the Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake Nipplegate thing, where media was incredibly conservative. And I was approaching it like a mainstream self-help book. And that was, I approached it like any other self-help book. And I think because that was my lens, I was able to penetrate the mainstream. So I was surprised, but I also believed in the book. And it wasn't a surprise because I was working very hard all the time to get it out there. So it wasn't like some big surprise just landed on my lap and I had a bestseller. I was working quite hard for every victory and going up against a lot of sex avoidance and sex negativity. In fact, the first time I was going up on the Today Show, the night before, they said they didn't want to bring me on because the book it was too taboo, and the title "She Comes First" was too taboo. And I was crestfallen. I was crushed. I was about to go out and talk about my book on the Today Show, And I think it was my publicist, because I didn't come up with this. They came up with a solution where they covered the title with a bow. And they said, we're going to talk to you about a book that has a title that's so provocative that we can't even show you the title. And I think they overdid it, because when people actually saw the title, they were disappointed. They were like, that was the provocative title? I mean, come on. It only created a little bit of hype. But yeah, it wasn't easy. The thing that I had going back then, though, it was also like a Sex in the City kind of era. And that created a kind of buoyancy and lightness around sex in the culture that I'm not sure we actually have today. I'd have to think about it. In some ways, I think there were certain aspects of 20 years ago that were easier than today.
That's an interesting observation. What do you find comes up most with your couples when it comes to sex therapy?
The most common issue would be desire discrepancy. Couples are stuck in a rut. One partner wants it more than the other, or both partners don't really want it, or don't want it but don't want it with each other. There isn't the frequency of sex, or the sex isn't a positive enough experience to motivate them to have it more. But I would say desire discrepancy is the number one issue. Lack of libido, mismatched libido.
So is the first thing that you do is start that conversation? Is it about the communication? Is that where you begin?
No, where I would begin is by really understanding the history of the issue and how not the history of the people, the history of the issue and how it manifests in this particular relationship. I'm not interested in knowing all of the history under the sun, but I really want to understand the history, which will totally give me a sense of the formulation of what's going on and the particular character of the problem. But then with something like desire discrepancy, this is where my new book comes in, or it's not so new anymore. It's over a year or so old. I'll ask them, so tell me about the last time you had sex, right? Because I want to hear about sex in action. They have a problem. They're not experiencing desire, or they're not getting aroused. They're showing up and one partner's not into it. They're distracted. Let me understand in the course of a sexual event, how does that problem occur? Why is it occurring? And if I'm hearing about it in action, I really have much more of an idea about why it's happening and what can we do about it. So I call sort of a sexual event, I sort of say that a sexual event has a script to it. There's an underlying sequence of interactions that are behavioral, emotional, psychological. And once I have a sense of the sex script with a problem, like it doesn't work for every problem, but it works for a lot of problems, then I have an understanding of the sex script, and I can help the couple edit the sex script in a way in which it will no longer be a problem, but hopefully be a pleasure.
So let's get to the book then. You're touching on it. Why did you write this last book? So tell me about the last time you had sex. Why'd you write that book?
I wrote that book because that's the question I most ask to my patients, to understand what's going on and to help them. And I really wanted to bring individuals, I wanted to bring readers into my practice, people I've not seen. I wanted them to feel as close to me and my process, which is quite solutions oriented. I wanted them to feel as close to me as possible. So that was my motivation for writing the book. And I felt like, gosh, I've been doing this now for so long. I really understand everything that is in that question and all of the different areas that it touches on, right? It's not just the sequence of behaviors that you're doing, taking off your clothes, hands here, mouths there. There's the emotional life. There's the history of the couple. There's trauma. There's aspiration. There's communication. There's so much in a single sexual event.
And do you find that when you ask that question, people have the vocabulary to actually answer it?
Well, first off, it's very rare for a couple to agree on the last time they had sex.
Oh, wait, really? Okay. Start us there.
Someone will be like, oh, we had sex, it was like a week, 2 weeks ago. And then someone will say, no, it wasn't. It was like 7 weeks ago. And then someone will say, no, we went out, we had dinner, we went to see Barbie, and we came home and we had sex. Okay, well, that wasn't 2 weeks ago. That was 4 weeks ago. Okay, well, it was 4 weeks ago, but it wasn't 7 weeks ago. That is such a common conversation.
Right.
Or I'll ask, so tell me about the last time you had sex, and it will be silence. They don't know. They can't remember. It's been so long since the last time they had sex that they sort of don't have a memory of it. And that's also common. So the first thing is just establishing that there was a last time that they had sex and when it happened. And I'm supplying the vocabulary as we go along, How did you two decide to have sex? Of all the things you could be doing, why was it sex? Where did it happen? When did it happen? What time did it happen? How did it get going? Who initiated? Who gave the tap on the shoulder, right? So I'm scaffolding at every stage. So then you went into the bedroom. What came next? Sex came next. Oh, you mean you went straight to intercourse? You had fully aroused genitals? Oh, no. We do A, B, C, D, E. Okay, and then I'm really walking them through every part of a sexual event. Right. And so I'm providing a lot of the language for them. I'm modeling in the room how to talk about this stuff.
Why is it that talking about it is so difficult? What have you found?
What I've really found is that, so we all have our individual sex scripts, our relational sex scripts. And by that, I mean, you're not sitting down and saying, oh, let's write a script together. You're falling into a pattern more than likely. And you're just not really talking about it. And that is becoming your default sex script. But our personal sex scripts, our relational sex scripts also exist in connection to the cultural sex scripts that are out there around how men are supposed to perform and show up, around how women are expected to show desire. There's so many cultural scripts out there around sex that most of the time, we're working against those scripts in some way. We're challenging those scripts. And I'm a big advocate of challenging those scripts. For example, most couples will come in, heterosexual couples, and they will believe that intercourse. Do you mind if I use specific language?
No,
I don't know.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
They will believe that like penis and vagina intercourse, or for gay couples, penis and anus intercourse. They will believe that that is fundamentally what defines sex, and that if you are finding other pathways to pleasure, if you're enjoying other kinds of stimulation, you're not having sex. So we're here to have intercourse, right? That's a response to a cultural sex script where someone said, where it became reinforced that a penis and a vagina, which is just a behavior, it's the same as a hand on a penis, a hand on a vulva, a mouth here, a mouth there, that behavior is the pivotal behavior in a sex script. So I think we're often going up against cultural expectations. I think there's often a degree of shame. I think in most relationships, we didn't start off talking about sex, and so we don't know how to enter into the conversation because it was just not there in the first place. And as I said earlier, in many cases, it was never there in the first place. It wasn't in our homes. It wasn't modeled for us. We didn't have those conversations. So I think that sexuality has always sort of been exiled a little bit.
So what's your recommendation with a partner about communication, about verbal communication regarding sex?
Well, I think you should have it first and foremost. I mean, from the very beginning, I think you should be able to talk about sex with a partner advocate for what feels good, what doesn't feel good, when you want to have it, where you want to have it, just like you'd plan the date itself. I mean, I think you got to get the vocabulary in the room. And trust me, once I'm in this room with a couple and they start talking and we break that ice, they're going to go home and keep talking. It's once you break the ice, you're really liberated. So I would say the first thing is start to talk about it and self-advocate. And the second thing I would say is do so in a loving, empathetic way. Don't do so in a defensive way. You always do this, you never do this. Think about the other person and think about how you got there. And maybe there's like a vulnerability that you can tap into. Like, hey, lately I've been feeling a little neglected. I mean, I know you're working so hard, and I know we have kids, and so I'm not blaming you at all. I've just said, like, I feel kind of neglected because we're just not connecting in that way, and I miss this. I miss that connection. That's so much better than saying we haven't had sex in a month, or you're sexless, or what's going on. This is a sexless relationship. So having the conversations and having them in vulnerable, empathetic ways, which is the rule for most relational conversations. I will say that there's one thing that's different, which is that the language of sex is sexy. So very often a person will come into me and let's just say the problem is, we never have any foreplay. He never wants to touch me or kiss me or whisper in my ear or go down on me, and it's just straight to intercourse, and he's so limited or so selfish, right? Okay, fine, I understand all those emotions. What is it that would actually constitute good sex? Tell me what good sex will look like for you, and then they'll describe a sex script that's different, right? They're creating the sex script that they want. And then I will say, wow, that's really, really clear and really specific. Express that in a way that's a little hot. I'm not saying you have to do it fully to me right now in the room, but if you were describing a fantasy in a way that involved those same behaviors, how would you describe it? And then they start to describe it in a way that it has a little bit of a heat to it. And I'll say, wow, you came in just complaining about something, and negative, and you found a positive pathway that you want, and you found a really kind of sexy way of saying it. Like, why don't you go home and tell that to your partner? Oh, no, I would never share a fantasy with my partner. Right? No. We didn't get, great. And then I will say, okay, so you're embarrassed. You're a little shameful. Do you wake up? Do you tell your partner your dreams? Yeah, sure. I sometimes have dreams in the morning. We sometimes talk about our dreams. Do you ever have a sex dream or a sexy dream? Yeah, I've actually sometimes even described like a bizarre, weird sex dream or just something sexy like there where my unconscious took me. Okay, why don't you wake up and next time tell your partner, I had a really sexy dream about you. And whether he or she asks you right there or asks you later, fill in the blanks with the fantasy of the sex that you want. And if your partner doesn't ask you about that sexy dream, well, that might be diagnostic too, that something needs to be looked at.
Oh, that's very clever. Okay. Okay. So I want you to dive into this sex script and explain what exactly is that sex script and how can we rewrite it and write it so it works for us. So define sex script. Let's start with that.
Okay, well, a sex script is the sequence of interactions that underlie a sexual event. It's like a movie that has a beginning, middle, and end. There's a structure to a sexual event that begins usually from a pre-aroused state, moves us through a process of arousal, possibly, hopefully, gets us through orgasm and a return to a pre-aroused state. And then there's the space in between sexual events and how we keep our sexual selves in the room. And so that is what a sexual event looks like. And so I break it down into a few different phases. The first phase is I call it embarkment. Now, you could call it desire as well, but embarkment is a phrase that to me gives the feeling of like gaining momentum. We're embarking, we're starting, we're not at full speed. And that term creates space for different desire frameworks, because very often, especially in heterosexual couples, the partners are not experiencing desire in the same way, and there's a lot of miscommunication. For example, a male partner may be in what we would call a spontaneous desire framework or a reactive desire framework. They're a sexual cue. My wife comes out of the shower. She's in a towel. She looks hot. I see her. Not only do I see her, I feel that in my body, and I feel a sexual urge towards her. So every day I'm probably getting sexual cues and quite possibly getting a little frustrated because I'm probably not having sex every time I get turned on. But that would be one desire framework, My wife, like many women, happens to be in a different desire framework where she can see me come out of the shower and she could say, well, okay, that's a cute guy there, but I can see that he's sexy, but I don't want to have sex with him. There's a different process of arriving at desire. And very often these two frameworks clash. So under the idea of embarkment, we'll really talk about how to reconcile desire frameworks. I'll explain them, and I'll get into much more detail than I'm getting into now. And we'll talk about reconciling and creating a shared desire framework. So hopefully, if you have a shared desire framework, you're then able to move into a phase that I just simply call arousal one. Why do I call it arousal one? Because a lot of couples go straight to genital stimulation pretty quickly, and they skip above the neck. And by above the neck, I don't just mean kissing and sensual connection and caressing of the face. I mean turning on our erotic imaginations in some way, right? Many women can fantasize their way to orgasms. Men can sit back in a relaxed environment, watch some porn, and within a few minutes have an erection. We have the capability of our brains metabolizing into physical sexual arousal. We're just not doing that with each other. So I want to get above the neck, and then I also want to get above the waist in terms of touch and sensual connection. I really want to get everything warmed up in that arousal one phase, because if we go too quickly to genital stimulation, especially for women really need to get absorbed in a sexual event. More so than men, there needs to be a total process of absorption. The sexual brain has to be able to turn on, and the amygdala, the part of the brain that's associated with the outside world and outside stressors, needs to turn off. That's been proven in fMRI scanners when looking at the female brain during arousal. From arousal 2, we go to arousal 3. What is arousal 3? I like to talk about breaking free from the intercourse discourse and really getting into outer course. When you look at gay male couples and the last time they had sex, only 35% actually had intercourse. 65% were pulling together different outer course behaviors into complete paths to pleasure. Not so much with heterosexual couples. We really define a sexual event around intercourse. So I really want to create a place for various kinds of physical outer course. The next phase in a sex script is what I would call entrainment, where we know the dance we're doing, right? We know how to dance with each other. It's like driving a car. I know already how to drive the specific car that I own. Certain processes are automated. And when certain processes are automated, that frees me up to not think about those processes, so I can get really absorbed in the sexual script, in the sexual event. So there would be an entrainment. Then we would have an orgasm phase, whether they are mutual, asynchronous, one after the other. One partner has them, the other doesn't, no partner does. We'll look at the orgasm phase. We'll look at what I call the aftercare phase, which is the moments, the minutes, the period of time in which we can really enjoy the afterglow effect, hopefully of some kind of mutual orgasm happening at the same time or asynchronously. Then I will really talk about the next phase, which to me is the most important phase. Not that all the other phases aren't important, but the erotic thread. What is the connection between two sexual events? How are the two of you dropping into sexual moments and allowing your sexual selves to say hi to each other in their own specific way? Moments of flirtation, moments of objectification. How is that happening? And for so many couples, they just don't have an erotic thread. Life is too full. Life is too busy. They've really lost that. So no wonder they're in a sex rut, because there's no sexual energy in the room. So that, to me, those are to me the phases of a sex script. And when I ask someone to tell me about the last time they had sex, I'm looking at a sexual event through that lens. And I'm thinking about, all right, where do we need to do a little editing? Is this just maybe there doesn't need to be much editing, maybe just a little bit, or maybe it's like a page one rewrite. I don't know. But that's what a sex script is.
And how normal is it for that script to change throughout the course of your relationship?
Well, I think for a lot of couples in long-term relationships, when you have a sex script that works, and that could include even going out, having a great dinner together, hanging out with friends, having a couple of glasses of wine, coming home, making the time, anticipating, knowing we're going to have sex, having sex in a certain kind of manner that brings us both to pleasure and gets us both absorbed. A lot of couples tend to, when they have working sex scripts, kind of default into them. And there can be a lot of energy in them, especially if you are mapping psychological arousal on top of a working series of behaviors. If you're bringing your imagination, if you're bringing your ability to talk to each other in a really sexy way, you can stay in a functional sex script for a long time. You can also develop new sex scripts. You could have 3 sex scripts, 4 sex scripts. You could have a lot of different ways in which you like to have sex, but hopefully each way you like to have sex is mutual, consensual, agreed upon, and works.
So how often do you think you should sort of reevaluate that sex script and, communicate with your partner about that script?
If and when you start to feel a little bored, if and when it starts to lack a little excitement, if and when you're going to do your taxes before you're going to have sex because your taxes are high on the list, right? And sex is falling down the list of priorities. If something's really working and you're both loving it, I would try and get away from a pressure to have to do something new and novel. As long as it's really working, fantastic. Once you start to notice, and I have plenty of couples who come in who will say, you know what, we can give each other orgasms. We have really nice functional sex. I'm not complaining about that, but I'm getting bored, or I want something new. I want something exciting. Great. Let's see what we can do.
Ian, how did you get into this work? Where did this start for you?
This work started for me in my adolescence as I was becoming a sexual male, and as I was encountering sexual problems and sexual function issues. What are sexual function issues for men? They're usually early ejaculation, erectile unpredictability, delayed ejaculation. I was experiencing the smorgasbord, the full buffet of sexual issues. And I had no one to talk to about it. I mean, this is going back into the 80s. There were no men's magazines even back then. So I felt very alone, and I felt humiliated. I felt like I was so excited about sex and connecting, and I had so much sexual energy. But I felt like, gosh, I'm really terrible at this thing, and it's not going to be worth the trouble. It's only going to end in humiliation or a poor performance. And so I really retreated, and I got kind of depressed. And, you know, when I was in college, I actually worked in the library for work study and sort of do all my homework. But then I would also like read books by Masters and Johnson and Alfred Kinsey and Helen Singer Kaplan and Cher Hite. I just wanted to figure out how to be a good partner and how to be a good lover. Women were interested in me. I was interested in women. And I think that's where, you know, my education really began. And it wasn't until much later in life that I had the opportunity to sort of shift gears and pivot into becoming a psychotherapist and a marriage and family therapist and a sex therapist. But that fascination with sexuality and that fascination with being able to communicate about sexuality and take the stress and the anxiety and the negative emotions out of the room, that was baked into me as a young sexual male.
Mm-hmm. How can we help our kids so that they can be better than we are when it comes to communicating about sex? Is there a time, is there a right way to do this, to introduce our kids to communicating about sex?
Well, first off, I think kids bring their own questions about sex all the time, or engage in, especially when they're young, in sexual kinds of behaviors that may or may not be appropriate in different contexts. So I think developmentally, let's just say children come to us with either their questions or their behaviors, and those are wonderful opportunities, not to give them all the information in the world, but to answer the questions. Not to create the questions, but to respond to the questions. And so I think kids will naturally do that. I think second off, what's really important, what's most important, is to probably model what a healthy relationship looks like. Now, I'm not saying go and have sex in front of your kids, but they should know that you're in a loving, affectionate relationship. You know how many adults, young adults, middle-aged adults, sit on my couch and I ask them about their parents and were your parents sexual? Well, yeah, at least twice, because I have a brother, right? Right. You know, I always like to say that there's no study showing that if you accidentally walk in on your parents having sex, that it's going to psychologically damage you. But there are plenty of studies to show that if you never talk about sex, or all you see is negativity between your parents, you know, that is going to be psychologically damaging.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So is there you're not suggesting that there's an age, you're suggesting to wait for questions and...
Yes, but also, you know, especially I have two boys, and I have found that, and this is a lesson I got from Helen Fisher, the biological anthropologist, who said that when men historically were face-to-face, eye-to-eye, they were usually doing battle with each other. And so face-to-face contact usually triggers defensiveness. When men were at their best, they were sitting around a campfire telling stories, you know, in a side-by-side way. So I tried as a parent to sort of have a lot of like side-by-side conversations. And how do I do that? By just observing all of the inane sexiness that pervades our culture at all times, whether it's billboards, you know, shop windows, boxes, even sometimes cereal boxes, you name it. There's some inane marketed version of what sexiness is that isn't sexuality that I can get to comment on. Well, that's not how real women look. That's how porn stars look, you know? And just throw that out there in a side-by-side way and have a little bit of a exchange.
Open the conversation as opposed to shutting it down or ignoring it or turning their head the other way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ian, is there anything I didn't ask you about, or anything that you feel we should mention or, you know, talk about so that people who are listening get a good idea? You know, let's say this. Let's say you just listened to the podcast and you want to kind of rewrite your script. Give us a little piece of how we start that, because it's maybe one person, they're not listening to it with their partner, but
Yeah. So I would think about, am I having sex, or do I want to have sex? And am I currently not having sex? When I have sex, how is it going? Is it sex that motivates me to have more of it? Right? Ask yourself the question, the sex that I'm having, does that make me want to have more of it? The answer is yes. Maybe just go on about your day and address something else that needs to be addressed. But the answer is no, it's not. Start to think about the reason why. For men, it's very often an anxiety around performance. For women, it's very often not being able to get in their own, get into a sexual mindset. But think about why, and then start to think about what I described in terms of the script, and start to think about how you would rewrite it, and make it hot. Come up with a hot fantasy for what a realistic hot fantasy for what your sex life could look like with either with somebody you hope to partner with or your current partner. Not to say you might not end up in a discrepancy around your sexual personalities, but that'll be an interesting conversation.
And then how do you bring that conversation to your partner?
Again, I would go back to sort of, I'm feeling a little, I'm feeling a little unfulfilled in this. We've been doing this in a long time, and I think it's time, to start to look at this. The other thing is, we all have sexual personalities, just like we have other parts of our personality. We're serious, we're somber, we're angry, we're pensive. We have sexual personalities too. We're thrill-seeking. We're sexual couch potatoes. We like the same thing all the time. No, we want something new all the time. Let's talk about our sexual personalities. Okay. I think you're a little more of a couch potato than I am.
Won't that be a defensive? Couldn't that be defensive?
Yeah, that would probably trigger some defensiveness. I think I'm a little bit more of a thrill seeker than you are. Okay.
Start with that. Ian Kerner, the Sherlock Holmes of the bedroom. Thank you so much for joining me today in this conversation. Great conversation. I have to say, when I brought this up last night over dinner, I was telling my family I was going to talk to you. You should have seen the look on their faces. What are you going to ask him? Well, what does he say? I said, I'm not going to tell you anything. You're going to have to listen to the podcast. But they were so uncomfortable.
Right. And if you said I'm talking to like a real estate developer about, oh, no problem. Let's talk about something else. Right. It's such a taboo topic.
Yeah. Well, it was so refreshing doing the research even for this podcast, because, it made me think, it's like, why is it so difficult, or why is it such a taboo, or why do you have to click explicit? I guess if it's, really explicit, but because children might be listening to it or whatever. But it just really did make me think about the whole idea of conversation. And as I said in the intro, we talk about politics, we talk about, what we're going to have for dinner. We talk about all these things. And like you said, I love the analogy when you said, you'll tell your partner your dream, kind of because it's meaningless, but you won't tell them your fantasy, or you won't tell them, yet you'll share this really intimate experience with them. So I love that. That's definitely sticking with me, as a lot of other things are from this podcast. Ian, thank you so much. I'll have a link to your website in the show notes so people can reach out to you if they need to, or if they want to, grab one of your books or follow your website. It has a lot of good information in there as well.
Thank you. This was a pleasure, Alita.